experience. She's created her own training and consultation program on Self Psychedelic Integration, which is what she's sharing with us tonight. And so understanding, this is just my understanding of it. So understanding that, integration is obviously a really important part of the psychedelic experiences, then her model is designed to, for the individual journeyer to be able to engage the preparation and integration process on their own or with their peers, if you're unable to access a therapist or professional or paid for those kinds of services. So we're super excited to hear more about what you've got going on in the community and what you've been working on over the years. So help me welcome Sabrina up here. Thank
you. Hey y'all. First of all, thanks for coming out in 10-degree weather. Let's get my act together. So we can.
Do you want to take the mic out and hold it?
Yeah. I was telling him whenever I have a mic, I feel like I want to start singing Donka Shane and doing some karaoke. Probably don't want to hear that. We can move forward. So I'll start with talking a little bit about my background. So my background has all been from the, you can move this slide forward. My background has all been in embodiment. So yoga and massage, and my degree is in dance therapy. I'm a certified yoga teacher, blah, blah, blah. All that meritocracy stuff that says, I'm valid, right? And so my work has been, so even though I am a licensed therapist, I don't really operate as a therapist anymore. And the reason why is I kept doing things like calling myself a transpersonal therapist or a somatic therapist or, something to try and qualify what it is that I do when the work I really do is spiritual in nature. And that everything that I see in my practice can really be drawn down into a disconnection. Right, so our disconnection from ourselves, our disconnection from the earth, our disconnection from community. And so it started to feel really inauthentic that I'm calling myself a therapist when therapy is one tool, just like medicines are one tool, just like being out in nature is one tool. And that the real work is how do we get back to being in connection? Or another way of saying that is how do we integrate the all of it, right? And so, you can next slide. And so what happened is and how I got into working with psychedelics was before I had ever even had a psychedelic experience, I am very familiar with non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? So I do authentic movement and Buto and artistic processes. And so being in the weird spaces is the comfortable space for me. And I was living in Las Vegas, and there was a person who was taking people on journeys and wasn't quite making sure that they were prepared for it. And so they were having fallout or psychotic breaks and did not get the integration experience. And because I was an integrationist, because I could work with these non-ordinary states, it was easy for me to work within this field, even though I had never done psychedelics at that time. So, and so that's how I got into this. And then, now they have programs for psychedelic integration. And so I did a program. Now, I have my little letters after my name that says I'm valid in this work. And the reason why so this is the first time I'm really talking about this and sort of trying to put a model together around what is it that I'm doing with people and what is it that I'm doing that's different than what I've been exposed to. And part of the reason why I've created this and sort of trying to bring it out into the individuals who are having experiences is because not everybody can afford my rates, right? I charge a lot of money for what I do. I believe in what I do, and yet I also have another part of me that really questions this capitalism thing that we do, right? And that dichotomy and that dissonance between this part that holds this value of I believe in what I do, I believe that integration work is really important, it's powerful, and medicine should be available to everyone. And how do we provide people with the tools to actually take that experience that they're having when they're having a medicine experience and actually integrate it into their lives. So it's not a standalone experience, right? And my experience is that, we can go ahead and move forward. So I was going to read this, but now I realize we're a little bit short on time. So can you tell me actually when I'm supposed to be done with this, so I can keep track?
You're fine. 10 after 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this is some guy who I just actually discovered. He has a website and a Facebook page called Healing from Healing. And he says, healing culture is, in its essence, a culture of consumption. Consumption is inextricable from the way we think about healing, transformation, and personal development, hopelessly entranced by the allure of its slick marketing and grandiose promises. The wellness industry delivers endless streams of aspirational content as we chase our tails, signing up for yet another exotic retreat, doing another diet, buying the new supplement that we saw in the Swole Guy's Instagram Live, buying into another keto junk food, pumped up with sponsored content for yoga moms and Lululemon pants, and craving that new fancy treatment that we saw advertised in the stylized pastel fonts on the Goop Lab. Doing the work is the new moral imperative of the awakened consumer class, who trade in webinars that teach us how to be mindful entrepreneur and conscious capitalists, mixing and remixing word salads that draw from the language of marketing and the jargon of healing to produce new brands of expensive and organic spiritual bypass, contributing our bloated share of carbon footprints as we book round-trip flights to Tulum and Bali, casually gentrifying and destroying the delicate social fabric of our exotic paradises, turning them to Instagrammable pockets of colonial privilege. Of course, as long as we call it medicine and healing work, we can indulge in all of these excesses without much guilt. And if we stop for a moment and in a flash of lucidity, we begin to reconsider what doing the work actually means, we run the risk of being shunned and ostracized from our community of committed light workers who might feel personally attacked if we decline their invitation to participate in another conscious, full moon, tantric, cacao, and DMT, Enneagram-inspired shamanic ceremony. You gotta look into that shadow, brother. How are you gonna do that without frog poison or Amazonian vine juice? And what is integration anyway? What does integration mean in the age of hyper-individualistic alienation and ecological catastrophe? What could integration look like, grounded and in alignment with our individual, social, and environmental global predicaments?
That's really
I wish I wrote that. That's like the bomb, right? And so this is, my dichotomy and my dissonance between I believe in what I do and I'm part of this healing tribe, and also we have to go back to the old ways. We have to have our shamans need to be our brothers and our sisters and our best friends. That's where the work is. And this thing that we're doing and commodifying, there's one hand, I get it, it's valuable. I do workshops, I lead trainings, I charge for them. And also, somewhere there has to be the balance between how do we do this as common folk? Right? Rather than leaving it into the hands of experts like myself, right? So this is sort of, this is how I work with my own guilt around the work that I do and find that balance between, our capitalism healing work and really getting back down to the earth. Let's skip to the next slide. So this is a really rough draft that I'm in the process of working through, and it's really looking at the difference between the models that we're using, right? So the medical model is, focus on educated experts, it's pathology focus. The chemical of medicine is the active ingredient. It's patriarchal and hierarchical, just like psychotherapy. The scientific model is the highest value, it's individualistic. The set and preparation is via the therapeutic process. Setting is based on structures. Integration is a strong focus, but it's often limited, and we'll talk about that a little later. And ethics are really focused on legalities and not fully explored. So one of the things that I do is I teach clinicians the use of psychotherapeutic touch. No one really talks about that. In the world of psychedelics, touch is considered part of the process, and yet nobody's trained, right? And in the shamanistic model, the shamans are the experts. The spirit it's sort of a spirit pathology focus. The spirit of the medicine is the active engagement via the shaman. It's community focused with shaman hierarchy. Spirit God is the highest value. Spirit, community, and individual are sort of integrated. Set and preparation is determined by the shaman. The shaman determines the setting. Integration is generally limited, and ethics are very rarely explored. Right. In the Self Psychedelic Integration model, it's highly somatic. So it's really about moving on the inside and learning. So the individual is the expert. We are the expert of our own experiences. And that medicine can also be an expert. Guides, shamans, therapists are helpful adjuncts. They are not the thing. Wholeness is focused. People are not broken. Rather, we all have parts that carry wounds. Medicine is one tool. Among many other tools for expansion, there is no magic pill. It eschews hierarchy, and it's individual and community focused. Integration is the highest value. It is very pluralistic. There is space for all of it. And preparation is via self-reflection, artistic process, somatics, and all of our parts in alignment. I'll talk to that a little bit more. The setting that we create is via self-reflection, again, artistic process, somatics, parts in alignment. Integration is the work. Right? The medicine within itself is just a tool. It's a really powerful tool, and there are lots of other tools that we can use. And ethics are integrated within this process. You can move to the next slide. So I'm going to do a little experiential with you after I get some water, because I'm parched. All right, so I'm going to invite you all, if you would be so kind, to close your eyes for a second. Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Nikisha. And just close your eyes and actually just take a moment to breathe. And notice that there's some background noise, and just let that be background. And in a few minutes, I'm just going to say some words. And all I want you to do is just notice what happens in your body as a response to those words. So look for, does it feel more expansive or more contractive? More open or more closed? More light or more dark? More tense or more relaxed? And so you're not trying to do anything with it, you're just going to notice. Kindness. Community. Lollipops. Conflict. Aggression. Mangoes. Mochas. Laughter. War. Global warming. Peace. Friendship. Love. And then just taking one more breath, breathing your body bigger, and bringing your awareness back to the ground. And opening your eyes whenever you're ready. So, I'm going to pass over the mic for a few little comments. If anybody's willing to name what they noticed in the different words. Anybody?
I noticed expansion in my heart. Every word that you said that had like a positive connotation to me, and then contraction in my stomach as war and the other words were spoken.
Anybody else?
That's exactly what I felt. It's like the same.
Ditto, right?
Which is true for most of us, right? That some of those responses will be different according to what our own experience is. Like, if I say family, if you have a loving family relationship with no drama, it's going to be like, yeah. And if you have a conflictual family, you might have a little push-pull, right? The whole point of doing this process is that your body knows your own wisdom. I'm looking at you because you're also a somatic person, so you know this, right? That we actually need a lot less guidance than we think we do, because our wisdom is right there in our bodies. Right? We can go ahead and move forward. I don't really know what is next, but so let me go forward. It's one of those things in COVID. Have you noticed that you can't actually lick your fingers and touch pages? But I can do this because it's mine. All right. So Self Psychedelic Integration includes somatics, internal family systems, I'll explain that in a minute, expanded states of consciousness beyond the medicines, creative and expressive arts like poetry, art, dancing, singing, etc., energetics and touch, neoshamanistic ritual, community, the natural world, and the indescribable. And while I'm separating these out theoretically, there really is no separation any more than you can separate the nervous system from the circulatory system from the, various other systems. So for example, I could do movement in nature, right? I could sing my poetry, right? So we can go ahead and move forward from that. So we talked a little bit about somatics. I'm going to talk really briefly about internal family systems. How many of you here are familiar with internal family systems? Beautiful. So it works really well with psychedelic integration. The general concept is that we all have a whole, grounded, wise self. Every spiritual tradition has a word for this. So the Hindus call it Atman, right? Christians call it soul. The Buddhists call it no self. Right? And it's basically that place in us that is unwounded. And that oftentimes we don't even know that it's there because we have so many sort of sub-personalities that take over. Right? And so the work of IFS and the work of psychedelics is really, how do we come home to that beautiful, wise, expansive self? And that work is via working with these parts that get in the way. So we can kind of look at those as sub-personalities. So we have the parts of ourselves that have been wounded. We call them exiles. They're the places that we don't want to feel. We don't want to see because they're too scary or painful. And then we have our managing system. And we have two different kinds of managers for our protective system. We have our normal managers, which is how we're normally managing life. So I'll give you an example. I grew up with a father who was very aggressive. Right, and very violent. And so when my father was around, I was small, right? I didn't take up a lot of space, I didn't speak. And then my father left, and then I got a badass part, right? That like, don't you fucking talk to me, right? And so that part was protecting, like it was the never again part. I will never again let somebody violate me, right? Now, if I'm operating from that part, I can never actually be in this grounded self. I can never actually be in my peaceful place because I'm always constantly protecting against the violence. It's also really not going to help me much if I'm that way with my boss. Don't you talk to me that way. Right? So now let's say that this is how I'm living my life, and now I have a boss who does talk to me that way, and I completely lose my shit. Right? and now I'm a screaming, raging something, or I go home and I drink, right? And so that's what we call firefighters, right? They're also trying to keep this exile from coming out. And the difference between that is managers are how we generally live our life. They're long-term focused. Firefighters are make that place go away. And so if you've ever seen a house where firefighters have come in and doused the house, the chemicals are so toxic that you have to take the house down to the studs. Right? And that's kind of what our firefighter system does. Okay, you can move on. And so one of the ways that we're really doing is we're looking to how do we get to this grounded self-energy. IFS uses some concepts like the 8 C's. It's just their little, acronyms for how do we know when we're in that self-energy. And they call it, creativity and compassion and clarity and curiosity and courage and compassion, right? When we're in our grounded self, those are qualities that we carry. There are other qualities that we carry too. That's like expansiveness or kindness, right? And so we can tell when we're in a part versus in our grounded self by, am I these things? Am I feeling calm? Am I feeling connected? And if I'm not, what's that part that's coming up? And this is what often comes up in our psychedelic experiences, right? Right? It's our parts that are kind of processing through. We can move forward. So we can say that our grounded, wise, infinite knowing self is like the sun. It can be eclipsed and obscured, but it can never be eradicated. And that's really the same work with IFS and psychedelics. What we're doing is we're trying to come home to that Atman, to that grounded self, to our big expansiveness that is expanded and connected to the something bigger. Okay, move forward. We also have this phrase that we say, all parts welcome. Right? That there is no bad part, that every single part of us has a wisdom, every single part of us has a truth, every single part of us is necessary, and that if we approach one of our parts with an antagonistic state of being, now we've created an internal war, right? And so this work with parts, for me in integration, is really important because when we go into, for example, if our clients or if we are going into doing a journey, we need to know that all of our parts are in alignment. And this is oftentimes why people have negative experiences, right? Because they're going in with their head or they're going in with this idea and they have other parts that are not in alignment. And so we have to work with the parts that are like, okay, what's the part that has concern? And then the work would be either to alleviate them from their concern, right? Or to ask them to not be present during the psychedelic experience. Just like if I have parts that are sexually wounded, I don't want them active in my sex life, right? They need to not be in my bedroom, right? Until they can be healed, right? Or we make the option to not do the journey until we can actually work with those parts, until all parts can be in alignment. And this is part of the reason why we have fallout, because people go into journeys not knowing and not having all their parts in alignment. So there are tons of options for expanded states of consciousness. Psychedelics is one of them, right? So we can get into those places through meditation and breath work, through art making, through psychedelics, through lucid dreaming, through shamanic journeying, through hypnosis, through the deprivations like sleep fast, food fast, sensory deprivations, through indulgences like physical exercise or sex or music or singing and sound, through certain therapeutic states, and through certain movement states. And so what we're wanting to do with people is to say, like, psychedelics are not the only place that you can go to get that, right? To dive into the unconscious, to dive into those non-ordinary states of consciousness. It is one tool among many, and the integration work, using some of these tools for integration, can actually take that experience that we have in the journey state and bring it into our real life so that there is less dissonance between the sacred world and the mundane world, And that's really what we want to do, is we want to take this yummy juiciness that we get in our psychedelic experience, or the difficulty in our psychedelic experience, and actually begin to weave it into our lives so that we are not living in this binary world. Right? Go ahead and move forward. I'm going to give you an example. So, we'll see if it works. So I'm going to do a little movement, which means I'm going to have to shut down my shoes. So if I talk to you about my mother. So my mother had Alzheimer's, and I actually moved away from here about 6 years ago to take care of her, because I wanted to be with her before she forgot who I was. And eventually she did forget who I was. And it was really painful seeing my mother cry and be desolate without being able to take care of her, when this was a woman who never cried. And notice what you're feeling right now as I'm talking about that. Right? There's some compassion, there's some understanding, right? But I'm talking about it. Right? I'm referring to it rather than being in it. So I'm gonna do a little movement and be in it. I just want you sort of to notice what happens in your own system as I do this. What did you notice? Did anything different happen in your system? Yeah. Like every time I do, it's not the first time I've done this example, because it's really easier for me to go into the space of like, oh, something's happening, right? So as I'm just allowing my body to move, and all I'm doing is what wants to happen, this. And now I'm feeling the thing that wants to move through. Right? And so this is in some ways form of like authentic movement or Buddha, or some of these practices that say, how do I actually take this experience that I have in psychedelics and actually sequence it through? Right? So if I saw a monster, if I entered into a grief state, if I, felt myself being raped, whatever it was, right? How do I actually move that through my body rather than leaving it into a standalone experience? Because what we're looking to do is, a lot of times psychedelics will expose us to something, but then we have to sequence it through. And so the difference between holding this experience in a contained state versus actually, how do I actually let it move out of my body? How do I release it energetically? And movement is one of the most powerful ways that we can do that. Rebecca, would you be willing to come up? So Rebecca works with me. We have very similar experience. She's a movement therapist as well. So we can also use movement in community. So after, let's say that we've had our experience, and Rebecca's my sweet friend, and we've done sweet journeys together, right? We can do that within the psychedelic experience, or we can do it afterwards. So I'm going to take the mic down, and we're just going to do a little bit of movement, and just notice what happens as you witness.
Take it off.
It doesn't feel right.
So you guys can tell that like the work that I'm doing is primarily experiential. Right? That yes, talking is important, but the experience is. About skilled movement. It's about being in relationship. And it's about bearing weight and receiving weight. And it may be that we're in a journey together, one of us is processing anger, and maybe Rebecca holds the angry space for me, right? And maybe it turns into right? So,
I mean, that's part of the joy of psychedelics, right? Is it takes us out of the way that we normally process things, right? Which is left brain, right? And what we really need to integrate is to move into our right brain. So another way of saying that is our left brain is really our thinking analytical brain. Analytical brain is great for doing accounting. It is not great for directing a life, right? The right brain is kind of like we talk about the right brain, but it's really the body brain. And that's actually where integration really lies. Right? Can we move forward? Where are we at on time?
7:54.
Thank you. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about embodiment and touch. So touch is considered, unlike in traditional psychotherapy where there's a lot of hesitation around touch and it's a slippery slope, like you can't trust yourself as a therapist to touch somebody without, grabbing their breast or something, right? Which is ridiculous. And so what happens is touch happens in therapy, but it happens in secret and people aren't trained. And in the world of psychedelics, at least psychedelics in therapy, touch is considered part of the process, and yet our clinicians aren't trained. Right? And so that's a really important component. And that when we're in our own psychedelic journey, right, that we can actually use touch in the process, whether we're in the middle of it, whether in the beginning of it, or towards the end in integration. Right? And so I'm going to ask you guys to just close your eyes for a second. And just take a hand and put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. And just notice how that feels, to just take a moment. You can then move one hand into a different location, like maybe the side of your face, or some other place that calls to you, a shoulder, a leg. And just notice what happens to your energy just as you were just doing a quick little touch. Like it helps us come home a little bit more. And you can open your eyes and come back. Right? There are also some really cool tools that you can use. I have a YouTube page that you can go to. If you look up Sabrina Santa Clara on YouTube, you'll find it. And there are some kind of cool things that we can use to help the process. So one of the things that we can use is a weight bag. So if you get a little pillow that big, fill it maybe 3/4 of the way with rice, it provides a weight. So many of you have heard the concept of having like a weighted blanket. But weighted blankets tend to be a little too diffuse, and if you're in menopause like me, they're way too hot. Right? But one of the processes that you can use when you're in a journey state, the feelings are feeling a little unsafe or feeling like a little too much, you can put that bag right on your abdomen. All of a sudden, okay, there's safety. Right? So there are some really practical tools that we can use that don't require an integrationist, that don't require a therapist, that don't require a shaman, so that if we're taking our own journeys, that we have tools that we can use. Right? And that doesn't require a specialist. Move forward. And so, in this incarnation, our bodies are the medium through which we experience the spiritual. So rather than transcending the physical world, the practice is to deepen into our full humanity and the sensory emotional body. And that's really where integration is at. Yes, we need all the sort of thinking process and integrating that into our lives, and it's really about living in the experiential world. You can move forward. We can also use artistic process. This is mine. I'm not particularly an artist. I can't really draw anything representational. But almost every journey that I do, I usually draw something. Yeah. And there's this little trick in drawing is that we orient in drawing after a journey, rather than thinking I'm drawing something or coming up with a picture, we allow our hands to find what is satisfying. So it might just be this, or it might be poking the paper. So it's not about the end product, it's about the process and how does it feel. And then we find that there's this little lovely trick that we can do when we're doing process work. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Is that when we turn it upside down, we actually often get to sort of unconscious material. So in this journey, if you can take it back. So in this journey, this was actually my second mushroom journey. And the first journey I took, it was really powerful, it was wonderful, but I was also very, very cold, and I got the shivers, and it was hard on my body. So in the second journey, I took it on my own. I had like a heater in front of me. I was like working with like, go ahead, it's okay, you're not really cold, it's just the body that's like doing this thing, right? But because I was so cognitive, didn't really have this wonderful experience because it was too much in my head. But then after it, I did this, and then you go ahead and move it again, right? And when turned upside down, the message that I got was whether or not I didn't feel like I was being held, I was being held. There was support for me, whether or not I felt it at that moment. That spirit is always with me. And so sometimes the message is that, like, had I not done this, I would have just been stuck with, okay, well, that was a weird experience. Right? You can move to the next one. Right? Here's another piece, right? I didn't know what this was, I was just doing, but it felt like I was moving down, and then go ahead. Right? And I was like, oh, here I am actually moving into something really beautiful. Right? It's sort of the yin and the yang. Right? Next one. Right? Original direction. Didn't know what it was, I was just doing what it did. And then go ahead and do the next one. Right? And something different appears. Right? And if you look at, if you go back to the older version, notice what happens inside your body. And then the next one. That one for me feels super, super satisfying. Right? And so there are a lot of ways that we can process and integrate our experiences that are not about analysis, that are not about left brain process. And that sometimes that process of moving things through doesn't even necessarily mean that sometimes we understand things at the logical level. Right? It's like when you see a sunset, you don't have to analyze the sunset and say, well, that's really beautiful and I feel expansive and blah, 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 blah. You just have a feeling state. And so a lot of integration work, yes, some of it needs to happen at the cognitive level, but a lot of it is the how do I actually live in my world a little bit differently? How do I live a little bit more expansively? Can you tell me what time we're at? I'm trying to decide what really wants to happen next. All right, we're going to skip the touching thing. And we're going to move on to sound. All right. So you notice that when Rebecca was up here, that we were moving, and then I was like, right? So when we are, most of us have hesitation around sound, which is what Makesha does. Makesha really works with people to help their natural voice be able to come out. Most of us, just like movement, all kids know how to move. At some point, they develop an observing self, and all of a sudden now they're self-conscious. But kids will do, they'll do whatever they want. They don't care, right? Or like, the kids when they first discover sound, they just they make these really annoying but weird noises like, right? And we lose that, right? Because we become self-conscious not only around other people, we become self-conscious within our own selves. And part of working through and integrating our work is actually, again, at the unconscious level, or at the non-linear level, right? What happens when you have an experience where there is frustration, right? And it might be like, ah! Right? Or it might be, right? And so it looks really weird, but it's how we move things through, right? That we don't have to be so rigid and tight, and that's really the work of psychedelics, is getting us outside of this neural network of, sheeping in our world, rather than how do we live in our authentic self? How do we come back to our tribal selves and live the truth of what wants to happen, and allowing our expanded heart, or our wounded heart, or our frustrated heart to be able to live itself and sequence through, rather than continuing to contain. And that's the work that we want to do with integration, is actually begin to move into this expansive and all the weirdness that can sometimes happen in a journey, and bring weirdness back into our regular life. Because weirdness is where the interesting is. Sheeping is not very interesting, right? And that's where our, really the work that we're here to do is to be our most true and authentic self. And the shadow side to living in society is we become narrow, right? We do what we need to do to make society work. And then we lose a fundamental something that's really integral to our life force energy, which is what the world is missing. We'll do a couple more slides and then we'll complete. Go back. So this is artwork in nature. I actually found this once when I was walking over it in Lafayette, and it looks like a pier, like a funeral pier, right? Somebody's beautiful piece of work. But it doesn't have to be a lasting anything, but that relationship with nature, that art can happen in nature, movement can happen in nature, and we are called to go back to the earth. We have to go back to the old ways. Next one, please. This is a mandala that I did with a friend when another friend passed. Right? So art is around us everywhere. Art can happen with your used straw. It can happen with the leaves. And that process of, if we're doing a journey out in nature, that we can then actually move within nature or create art within nature. And that is part of the integration process, because we have to come back to our artistic self and our expressive self. Because we're stuck here. And we can keep moving forward. We're going to skip some stuff. And, let's go to that one. So there are also things that you can do in groups. This is Makesha and Rebecca and I, and we had a really lovely journey. And one of the things that we did at the end of the journey is we took some time to think about what was the lessons that we had in the journey, what was exposed to us. And in that process, what we did is, and I got this from, in Buddhism, when I take my vows, we do our little red strings around our wrist to do our vows. And I was like, what if we did that and actually chose a color that represented each of the lessons that we got, so that we can actually create a living memory. So that every time we see our wrist, we remember, one of my lessons in that last journey was that I am not called to sacrifice myself for the mental health of every human being on the planet. That I don't need to sacrifice myself to be of service. Right? And so looking at that wrist, it's like, oh yes, that's my lesson that I got from this. I need to keep remembering that. So there are ways that we can incorporate ritual that elongate the lesson and ground it a little bit more than if we weren't doing something like that. That it would be more of a standalone experience that would be easier to let go and forget. All right. We can move forward. And I just put that there because, this whole concept of spirituality really is like, there's this ineffable thing that we can't really explain, right? So I'm not even gonna try. Next one. One more. So I do trainings. I do trainings in psychotherapeutic touch. I do trainings. I'm working on developing this training so that this can be taken out. Therapists can use it, but really it's focused on the individual person, or how do we create our journey within community. If you want to find me, that's where it's at. Go forward, and I think that's probably all we have. Can we move forward one more? Every single training that I do, that I have a commitment to accessibility, which means that if you are a BIPOC or global majority identified person, and you are from a historically marginalized population, and you are providing care to BIPOC or other historically marginalized population, and have financial needs, there's always a discount. And I think this is one of the things that we all as clinicians need to figure out. How do we begin to soften some of the patriarchy? How do we, as clinicians and experts who are charging our massive amounts of money, how do we make this accessible to other people? And I think that's it. Thank you for your time.